The Chicago White Sox are hopeful that several players will return to form in 2023. Yasmani Grandal is at the top of that list. Grandal is staying in Chicago this offseason and putting in the work to set himself up for success for his final year on the South Side. Cy Young announcements will be made this week. Could the White Sox be proactive and extend Dylan Cease before he hits free agency? Dylan's agent, Scott Boras, he's got some thoughts.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Sox fans, welcome to Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Sox. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search Locked On White Sox. Hey, I'm your host, Nick Morawski, a lifelong diehard Chicago White Sox fan, recording this podcast just blocks from the ballpark in beautiful Bridgeport. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTB. Really appreciate you letting me steal some of your time to talk off-season White Sox. Locked On White Sox is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Lots of happenings in the baseball world this week, like the Rule 5 and non-tender deadlines. What will it take for the White Sox to bounce back and recapture the AL Central? And what does an interest in Sean Murphy say about Yasmani Grandal? Want to follow up on the conversation that I had with Jason Burke, who is the host of Locked On A's, joined me for the previous episode, talking about that rumor. Sean Murphy, a Gold Glove catcher from the Oakland Athletics. Sox have some interest in acquiring him. What would it take to pull that trade off? Really appreciate Jason Burke joining the conversation. It's just refreshing to hear from another perspective, what Oakland could be looking for, what they would want in return for their backstop. Jason really, he said it perfectly. The Oakland A's will want the biggest possible return, and the White Sox, probably do not have the prospects to get a deal done. I fall, into this thinking, and maybe you do as well, where, this makes sense. We should go get this player from this team, go after them, and it takes two, right? It takes two teams to get a deal done, and we just might not have what another team is looking for. And we have a lot of hope for Andrew Vaughn, but Jason said in the episode, he might be a little too old for what the Oakland Athletics are trying to do. I mean, could the Athletics sign Andrew Vaughn past this current contract? That might not be in the plans for the Athletics. They might be solely looking for prime prospects. No interest in Gavin Sheets. Surprise. Even like just the years on Gavin Sheets, which he reminded me, Sheets at 26 years old, not something that they are interested in. And really, Burke, Jason Burke said, look, it depends on what Oakland wants to do. And again, it takes two to get a deal done. Most likely not going to go the way of the White Sox, but always interesting to hear what other fans have to say about your team and your players. Jason and I talked a little bit after the recording. He had a lot of questions about Tony La Russa and why he was brought back to manage and what went wrong with the ball club in 2022 and some Abreu stuff. Hopefully we'll get him back and talk to him throughout this offseason. I'd love to do some more crossovers with other hosts as different rumors might pop up as this offseason continues. So Yasmani Grandal, why are the White Sox looking at Sean Murphy from the Oakland Athletics when we've got Grandal here? Well, we only have him for one more year, and Grandal, he has struggled. He has struggled to stay healthy. And, he's hoping, as is the White Sox, that he can return to form. There's a great article by James Fegan in The Athletic recently all about what Grandal is doing. And according to James Fegan, Grandal repeatedly said his slash line of 202, 301, 269 with just 5 home runs in 99 games was due to his struggles to reestablish the strength and explosiveness in his legs in order to regain power this past season. Yasmani Grandal is staying in Chicago this offseason to get better. Grandal's placement in Chicago has allowed him to train with Chicago Blackhawks strength and conditioning coach Paul Goodman. This Grandal's comments on the workout session from Fegan's article, quote, "It was getting endurance back up for at least the first 3 weeks. We are in our 30th session now, so it's been pretty rough all the way up to now. I'm hoping it gets a little rougher as we go on. I feel good. It's going great. I can't wait," end quote. Now, a reminder, Rick Hahn kind of highlighted Yasmani Grandal in some of his comments in the GM meetings from Las Vegas. This is what Hahn had to say on Grandal returning to form. Quote, "Having Yasmani be right, the 2021 version, much less the guy he was much of leading up to that, the guy is a huge asset to the 23 White Sox. There's always the health risk with any player, but it's more compounded with guys who have had previous injury issues. You factor that in the best you can, and you spend a decent amount of time looking for the underlying causes for why a guy fell off, and whether the underlying metrics and analysis show a reasonable expectation of regression," end quote. According to Fegan in his article, during Yasmani's rehab stints in AAA Charlotte in 2022, this past season, Grandal would encounter catching coordinator Julio Masquera. Masquera talking about Grandal's form and what he's working on. Quote, "We talked about a couple of things to get ready, to make sure when you go down to block, he relaxes so that he doesn't have that much impact in his legs. What we talked about was understanding where he needed to be in the setup to make sure he was able to get around the ball and make sure he was quicker to that position. The biggest thing for me there was the comfort level he felt right away, getting down into a comfortable position to block a ball. I told Yasmani, you're not getting any younger, and we're going to try to keep you healthy. There's an impact when you go up and down, up and down, up and down. What happens when you relax more on one knee? I think he gets more mobility, and that's what you want as a baseball player," end quote. So, Rick Hahn talks about players returning to their accustomed levels. That's the hope for 2023. Grandal is at the top of that list. The White Sox hope he can return to form, but are they confident? That's what I want to know. Are they placing the success of 2023 on Grandal's legs? Maybe. But then why is this rumor with the Oakland A's happening? Why inquire about Sean Murphy when there are so many other holes to fill? Perhaps the White Sox do not have as much faith in Grandal's defense moving forward, but think the real bonus to Grandal getting healthy is his bat and the return to his power. There were a lot of things that went wrong for the White Sox in 2022. I'm going to tell you why it's not impossible for the impossible to happen again. More on that in a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fixed. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. There was an interesting article that I stumbled upon on WhiteSox.com. You might have seen this as well. It was entitled "Keep an Eye on These Five Teams." Article was written by Will Leach, contributing editor for MLB. And the White Sox were one of these five teams that we're apparently, keeping an eye on heading into 2023. And this is what Leach had to say about the White Sox. The vibes were bad for the White Sox in 2022, pretty much from the start. They were riddled with injuries. Tony La Russa struggled with his health and seemed to constantly be under fire. And their fans spent most of the season waiting for a turnaround that never came. At the very least, having 2022 be over is the best news White Sox fans could hope for. But there's even more reason for optimism than that. That lineup should be healthier this year. And the White Sox should get a handy addition in outfield prospect Oscar Colas, who finished off a tremendous season in the minors by hitting .387 for a week in AAA. The rotation is deeper than most teams, and they should be able to strategically add if need be. And it's not like the AL Central is powering up. Someone's going to be in position to take advantage of the most of teams in this division spinning their wheels. Last year, it was Cleveland. It might as well be the White Sox this time. The vibes almost have to be better. Again, that was Will Leach, contributing editor for MLB. That word should, boy, it's popping up all over the place when it comes to the White Sox, and it did again in this article multiple times. Should. Yes, there were several players that were hurt this past season and even hurt in 2021 that should be healthier in 2023. But we said that at the beginning of 2022. The return to form and the should be healthier approach can't be the strategy if you are looking to recapture the AL Central and maybe, just maybe, win a playoff series. I get it. The rotation, it could be, it looks solid, and even Jason Burke mentioned to me from Locked On A's, you guys got pitching. But there are question marks with this starting rotation if the Sox are to go deep this year and beyond. Health is obviously a factor once again. You got Dylan Cease, who was an absolute workhorse. I mean, he took the ball. Lance Lynn has had some problems the last few years maintaining his health. He's not getting any younger. Michael Kopech could not finish the year. It wasn't an arm issue. It was a knee issue. How will he respond in his endurance level? And then Lucas Giolito, up and down this past season in particular, had some health issues, trying to almost redefine himself this offseason and his motion and everything that goes with it. And then the question mark is, are they going to bring Johnny Cueto back? Will it be Ronaldo Lopez, maybe Davis Martin, or will the Sox actually go out and get an actual starting pitcher with the limited money that they have? In this article, Leach also talked about the vibes. Yeah, the vibes should be better with this White Sox team for sure. But that falls on the shoulders of Pedro Grifol and his coaching staff, whatever that will be. But clubhouse vibes should also be a player issue. And if we're to believe Grifol, that tone is going to be set on day one in Glendale, Arizona. Busy week in the baseball world, lots of awards to be announced and teams needing to make important decisions. I'm going to tell you why we might get a better sense of the White Sox direction very soon. More on that in a moment. So Tuesday, November 15th, it's the Rule 5 deadline. Eligible minor league players must be added to their club's 40-man roster or teams will be at risk of losing them in the Rule 5 draft. Per Major League Baseball, players signed at age 18 or younger need to be added to their club's 40-man roster within 5 seasons or they become eligible for the Rule 5 draft. Players who signed at age 19 or older need to be protected within 4 seasons. So right now, the Sox 40-man roster is at 36. Some decisions need to be made by the White Sox. Who will they protect? We'll have some answers very soon. Looking ahead to the rest of this week, Wednesday, November 16th, American League and National League Cy Young Awards will be announced live on MLB Network at 6 p.m. Eastern. Dylan Cease is in that conversation. Could the White Sox extend Dylan Cease? There was an article on NBC Sports Chicago about this particular matter. Dylan Cease is arbitration eligible for the first time this winter and not eligible for free agency for 3 years. But thinking ahead, could the Sox be proactive? This is what Dylan Cease's agent, Scott Boras, had to say. Quote, I think with any young player that has shown elite top of the league level of performance, usually the teams, we just listen, Boras said. And during the GM meetings last week, quote, we're always open to what they have to say and how they look at it. We signed Steven Strasburg before he was a free agent the first time. Boras said of the 7-year extension Strasburg signed with the Nationals back in 2016. Boras went on to say, so our job is to just listen, take it in, and then we transfer that to Dylan and see what he wants to do. Hey, I'm hopeful. I'm absolutely hopeful that the Sox realize what they have in Dylan Cease and make him a serious offer and are proactive. Sox traditionally do not pay for pitching, and I'm worried that that's going to be the case once again with Dylan Cease, but we've got some time. Just wondering if maybe they're planning to be proactive with Dylan Cease down the road. Friday, November 18th, MLB non-tender deadline. All teams must offer their pre-arbitration and arbitration-eligible players a contract for the 2023 season by this date. Players that do not receive a contract offer are non-tendered, become free agents immediately. There are definitely some players on the White Sox that might fall in this category. Adam Engel, perhaps. And looking further down, but it's never too early. Winter meetings, the MLB winter meetings, that's December 4th through the 7th in San Diego. Sox have been relatively quiet in November, but once we get to December, boy, there are a lot of anniversaries to talk about of different deals that were done, some that went right and some that went horribly wrong. Folks, thank you so very much for making this podcast part of your daily routine. You can find the Locked On White Sox podcast absolutely everywhere you find your podcasts. We are on Twitter at Locked On Sox. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTV. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps in the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up in the next episode, I'll continue to examine offseason White Sox scenarios as Sox go full steam ahead with the Pedro Grifol era. Really appreciate you making time for the Locked On White Sox podcast. I'm Nick Morawski. Until next time, go Sox.